Hello, and welcome to today's webinar on how to manage energy budgets through volatility. Today, we're going to introduce ourselves, talk a little bit about Veolia, the challenge with energy markets, how to strategically procure energy, and finish with renewable energy solutions. To start, my name is Zach Traverso, and I'm an energy analyst in Veolia's Commodity Advisory Group. My work involves advising clients on numerous energy-related topics such as energy budgeting, energy contract procurement, renewable energy products, energy markets, and much, much more. I'm joined today by Alexei Cherniak, who's the principal analyst in Veolia's Commodity Advisory Group. Alexei, thanks for joining me. Please go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thanks, Zach. Yes, my name is Alexei Cherniak. I'm an analyst with Veolia, where I've been for more than 10 years. And I provide energy market expertise and risk management services to some of the largest institutional buyers in the country. My work primarily is focused in restructured markets, power and gas in the northeastern part of the U.S. But I help customers manage and strategize and transact in power, gas, and renewable energy markets.
Perfect. Thank you, Alexei. I'm excited to talk with you today about energy and energy markets. It's an especially important topic that we've been seeing a lot in the news due to the numerous instances of volatility we've been seeing over and over again over the past year in 2022. But before we start, let's talk a little bit about Veolia and what we do. Veolia designs and operates complex systems around the world and provides water, waste, and energy management solutions to support the evolving needs of industry and communities across North America, while simultaneously safely lowering costs and helping to preserve the world's limited resources. Veolia serves hundreds of communities and customers across the US and Canada, with over 400 work sites and 10,000 employees in the region. These employees create customizable services that solve complex challenges in water, waste, and energy. And Veolia strives to create a circular economy, which is a solution for industry and businesses at all scales to reduce, reuse, and recycle waste. The circular economy aims to turn all waste streams into a resource by reintroducing them into the production cycle instead of disposing of them at the end of their useful life. To accomplish all of this, we need energy. So without further ado, let's get started. Alexei, 2022 has been a wild ride in energy markets, and we have a lot to discuss. I think what's probably at the top of most people's minds, and certainly at the top of the mind for most of my customers, is that we've been seeing some of the highest energy prices in recent memory over the past year, which includes record pricing for natural gas, electricity, and even fuel oil. I've thrown together some statistics here that kind of help illustrate this point. As you can see, the average cost of NYMEX gas from 2021 over to 2022 increased almost 70%. The wholesale price of power in New York City between 2021 and 2022 increased between 70 to 100%. Heat was record-breaking. We saw 115% of previous records. And even the price of diesel increased between 50 and 75%. So it was just a crazy year overall, and that really impacts customers in a bunch of different ways. Most obvious is cost. We're seeing increasing costs of all of these commodities, and it made for a hard year for folks, which bled over into budgeting. It's hard to budget in times of volatility. So how do folks budget? How do they reduce the volatility that they're seeing in their bottom line? And it's something that all customers across all industries have had to deal with. And we talk a lot about natural gas just because it's sort of the marginal fuel in power sectors and sort of a barometer for how things are doing. And we started 2022 with NYMEX, which is the major benchmark for natural gas in the US, at about $4 in January of 2022. And then they topped out at nearly $10 per MMBTU in the summer, which was crazy. And this is a commodity that most analysts usually expect to be between $3 or $4, but obviously it shot up well above that in the past year. Alexei, what happened here to cause this?
Yeah, it's all great points, Zach. And it's true. Gas. If you go back 10 years ago or more, gas and NYMEX gas was extremely volatile. You expected significant year-over-year swings. The past 5, 10 years have been pretty stable, and so 2022 was abnormal, and and not just the more than doubling of prices that you mentioned last year, but you had regional constraints where the price went from $4 to $30. So it was, and again, gas is important because it is the primary fuel source for the electric power industry, and usually the price that sets the or the fuel that sets the price for electric power. So everybody pays a lot of attention to it, and really the difference in 2022. You asked about what was different. We exited last winter. We exited the winter with a modest storage deficit, and the gas that was in underground and available for use. Um, and that's not altogether abnormal. Sometimes we do exit the winter in a deficit position, and then we replenish inventories um, throughout the spring, summer, and fall. Um, that didn't happen in 2022. So what happened is we exited the winter, and the deficit actually got worse year over year. We didn't replenish inventories, so that imbalance grew. The market grew more anxious, and as the year progressed, typically we see as prices go up, and because they did go up, that a demand goes down in response to that. That didn't happen. The other thing we would typically expect when the price of gas goes up, that coal-fired generation tends to increase. It tends to displace natural gas-fired generation, and therefore mitigate the prices. That didn't happen either. Coal. There have been a lot of coal plants that were shut in the past few years, and primarily for environmental reasons, but also actually more so for economic reasons. Gas was cheaper than coal. And then, also coal prices were much more expensive in 2022. So it coincided with the high gas prices, so that substitution effect never happened. As you'd expect, prices they went from $4 to $9, almost $10 pretty quickly. And more importantly, even despite all of that, gas prices did not respond. The production, the supply of gas to the market did not increase despite the high prices.
And that's an interesting tidbit there that we normally see happen. So why was the industry so slow in 2022 to increase production after all of these factors were affecting the market?
Yeah. Well, there are a number of reasons. Obviously, everybody points to COVID as being, and that sort of demand whiplash as being a primary driver, and I think that's true for a lot of markets. For oil and gas, it's actually slightly different. And really to understand it, you have to go back probably, to the past decade. With the whole shale fracking boom, which really was highly successful and transformed the market and the U.S. economy by providing cheap and abundant natural gas supply. But the drillers lost a lot of money. So there are estimates from 2010 to 2020, the entire U.S. shale industry lost over $300 billion. And again, provided a lot of value, and a lot of us benefited from that. But they lost a lot of money. And what do you do when you lose a lot of money doing something? You do less of it. So in 2000, 2020, the natural gas price became, it went so low that a lot of these drillers went out of business. They shut in production, and they basically took their losses and cut capital expenditure. So what happened was that when demand ultimately came back after COVID, that those drillers were not effectively in the market. They hadn't set up new wells. Their inventory of wells and that were sort of ready to release new gas where it was severely diminished, and therefore the supply just was not as flexible as we'd seen it in the past. That all led to just a much tighter market, so in 2022, and um, it can take 8 to 14 months to drill a new well and bring that gas to market. So despite the higher prices, a lot of those drillers, they were a little slower this time to respond, and just not prepared. And so we started to see the supply pick up a bit towards the back, in the fall. And that's just adding some slack to the market that we're now seeing, which has resulted in the prices coming down quite a bit. Um, Still a lot of uncertainty in the world too. Again, in 2022, we had the first bout of real inflation that we've had in 30 years. We've had a major rethinking of supply chains across the globe. Some very strange and abnormal weather patterns. And then of course the war in Europe. All
Right.
those things played a big role. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's just been a lot of things all coming together at a weird time to cause all this uncertainty and volatility. It's really been quite the cocktail of stuff coming together.
It was a wild year. Yeah.
Yeah. I think this is a good time for us to take a quick break here and give the folks listening in a poll. Um, so on the topic of NYMEX, um, what do you think the average price of 2023 NYMEX gas will be? Do we think it's going to be less than $3, somewhere between $3 and $4, somewhere between $4 and $5, or more than $5? And obviously, everyone take a minute to think about this. But Alexi, let me pick your brain a little bit. Where do you think that this will end up?
It's a good question. So yeah, I clicked on $3 to $4. I think that's probably the safe bet where the market consensus is building now. Again, I a few months ago, I probably would have had a different answer. I think the fact that production has started to increase um, is and really rebalance the market is probably going to yield some bearish sentiment over there. At least the next year, maybe a couple of years. That's my guess. $3 to $4.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with you there. I think, we're not getting gas as low as we had seen it in the past of almost $2, but I think a lot of the things that were affecting it and driving up pricing in 2022 have sort of lessened, and so we'll see it be, more of a normalcy per se as we head into 2023 here. Um, Now, Alexi, you mentioned the war in Ukraine that's going on over in Europe that's affecting pricing, but obviously the folks in Europe aren't actually pulling any gas out of the ground here, and we don't have pipelines that go over to Europe to feed that. So, how does this war actually impact energy markets in the US?
Yeah, well, I mean, the short answer is not that much. You know, at least over the next 3 to 4 years. Um, and you're right. I mean, there's um, the two markets are very much isolated from one another. Um, Russia is a major gas supplier, and I think supplied something in the range of 50% of the gas to Europe, but or had been, up until the start of the war. In the U.S., we don't get any gas from Russia, and pretty much all the gas that we get is produced here in the U.S. Um, Now, the one tie between the two markets is LNG, and so right now we've got in the U.S. about 11 and a half BCF a day, billion cubic feet a day that we are liquefying and sending out of the U.S. Those are exports, net exports, and that gas represents about 10% of our total total production. But it's a hard number. You can't, no matter what's going on in Europe, you can't build a liquefaction terminal or an LNG tanker to carry that gas away. So in the short term, that number is not going to change. We're going to stay at around 10%. We're looking at 3 to 4 years before we see a significant increase in the actual export capability. There are some new projects in the pipeline, but it takes time, and we're not going to see them for at least until 2025. It takes 3 4 years to build one of these facilities, and they cost $5 billion. And let alone all the siting issues and whatnot. These types of projects rarely get finished on time. So you go 3 5 years out, 3 to 5 years out. It's going to look a little bit different. We're expected eventually to probably double our exports in about 10 years out. Things will look different, but in the short term, the markets are operate completely in isolation.
Yeah, so really you're saying Russia's curtailment of gas to Europe and the war just really doesn't have a large impact on us. We're sort of an independent entity from that market over in Europe.
Over the next few years, that's true. That's true. And there are some more nuanced ties. We both live in New England. We're very familiar with the constraints on the pipelines that can happen here just in the winter. And the fact that actually New England is the only region that actually relies on LNG imports, and really the only region that imports LNG at all for actual use. Um, we do that. We take some cargoes over the winter. Those cargoes, they're tied to the global LNG price. Those are spot cargoes. So at one point, you did see the price of winter power and winter gas in New England actually reflect to some degree the global LNG price, and so that added volatility. But that's one kind of isolated, kind of nuanced market. Um, not to say that there aren't plenty of constraints in the U.S. that have nothing to do with Russia, right? As I said, there's New England has its own supply issues that are a result of number of reasons, not the least being, it's difficult to cite projects here. There's very little policy or political support for energy, for fossil energy in New England. But even in California, the poor folks on the West Coast really have been paying prices that are comparable to European prices for most of this winter. And it's in some points actually the price in California for gas has exceeded the price of Europe, which is in crisis. But those issues apart, there's very little tie to the to the Russian war. In Europe, it's a completely different story. Europe, as I said, receives about 50% of its gas, or did receive 50% of its gas from Russia about a year ago. Now that's been cut to less than 10%. That mostly flows to the sort of post-Soviet state, countries around, and allies of Russia that are still receiving gas supplies. Russia's had to replace that gas primarily with LNG and other fuel sources. That's a totally different challenge and totally different situation.
Yeah, makes sense. But changing gears a little here, we've heard a lot about oil prices recently, and that could just be because it's both the heating season and we just recently had an election. But how has oil actually been impacted with all of this? Is it a little more affected than gas has been, a little less? Why are we hearing about it?
Yeah, I mean, oil's always it's the commodity everybody knows best because they put it in their car. And so, and Russia supplies about 10% of global oil. So that's a concern. It has the potential to impact the market if that oil is uh, restricted from the market or constrained. But I think that's unlikely to happen. I think what you're seeing is that despite a lot of the bans or boycotts, in the U.S. and throughout Europe, and there's also recently a price cap that is um, basically has been put in place by the Europeans on the price of Russian oil, and that's regulated or enforced rather through the insurance market for shippers. But that oil's still going to find a home. It's probably going to be targeting and has been targeting Eastern markets, China and India, and even if it's sold at a discount to the prevailing Brent crude global price, it's still going to land, and it's still probably not going to disrupt markets all that much. Um, one thing potentially has more of a longstanding issue is the availability of the heavier crude that Russia produces. So, if you compare the two types of oil, Russian oil or Urals tends to have a higher density, has more of that heavier crude that is used for diesel in the refinery process, whereas a lot of other markets, particularly the oil um, that's produced here in the U.S. WTI has a higher ratio of gasoline coming out of that oil. So the takeaway there is that diesel potentially could be constrained. You could see the price of gas and gasoline and diesel kind of separate and continue to separate as less of that Russian crude is available to Western markets.
Gotcha. Yeah. So to recap, really, it's been a volatile year for prices overall. We started with things relatively low pricing wise or normal, and then pricing doubled or tripled as we continue throughout the year, with the peak being in the summer. And we've just recently seen some modest relief, but there's still a lot of uncertainty as we continue throughout this winter and head into the summer season. And all these things are making life pretty difficult for the folks who are responsible for managing or procuring the energy and making all these decisions. Do I have that about right?
Yeah, it's exactly right. It's a good summary. It's been a wild ride, and it's kept folks like us and in our industry busy. And it's added to the complexity and stress of managing budgets for our clients. And so this is probably a good time and a good tie-in to our next poll, Zach. So I think that poll here is really asking our folks on the call, how comfortable do you feel about energy procurement for your company or your organization heading into the next year? Are you worried? Are you worried, but you think you've got this? Are you not worried at all, or do you not know?
Yeah, I think, just some experience from my customers is, I think, some folks are sort of in between. They're not too worried. We've helped them build out a good plan, but there's just so much uncertainty going on. It's hard to feel truly comfortable with where things are at, unless were someone with a crystal ball and signed a contract when prices were, amazingly low in 2020. There's a lot of folks that I'm seeing kind of coming off of older contracts that they've signed into this uncertainty and trying to figure out, what is my strategy moving forward? What do I do? Where do I go from here? And it's definitely been a tough time, and I've been having a lot of conversations with a lot of people about how they're feeling and what they want to do, and trying to sort through all this and figure it all out.
Yeah, it's definitely increased the importance of I'd say managed procurement and layering and all those things that I know you're going to get into. But you know, it it it, uh, it's important, particularly in times of volatility, to think strategically about your procurement, and to have a plan, and also to be able to react to changing market environments, but probably not overreact, right? So Zach, I mean, I know we're both in this every day, but what are some of the options that you think are important for customers to consider as they manage their exposure to high prices?
Yeah, so there's a couple things that folks need to keep in mind, and there's sort of like a pathway we can take here. So the first thing would be to evaluate your exposure. Take inventory of your facilities, the contracts that you have, what the structure of those contracts are, and just really figure out your use and how that factors into your budget. Look at how much you're using, how much that is making up of your budget, like percentage wise or total money wise, and just kind of make sure you're sure in where you're at with all of these things and how much that is making up and how much you have open to the market and all this volatility. The next thing would be sort of reviewing the objectives of your company and taking a good hard look at what your company wants to do over the next couple of years. Do you want to decrease your energy usage through upgrades or just purely trying to cut back on usage? Um, do you want to change locations? Do you want to become a greener company? All of those sorts of things are important to look at. You also want to look at what your existing budget is. Does it still hold up when you look back, a year or two and see, this is what we budgeted and this is what it came out. Does your budget look good? Did you have a lot of variance there? And then take
What's
a look at
what's your boss going to say if your budget goes up by 50%? That's always a good one, right?
yeah, that we've been seeing a lot more recently for sure. Um, and on that topic, what happens if you come in over budget by 5, 10, 20, 50% or under budget by that much too? Less likely, but still possible. And part of that discussion should, involve the risk reward profile that your company is willing to take on. Do you want budget certainty, or do you want to be able to, have a little more risk, but maybe take advantage of some of the market dips? Um, Energy markets around the country and even different areas of some states look totally different. So it's important that you really, take a hard look at this at the company level, but also sort of look at this on a location by location level because, if you're someone in New England and then you have another plant out in Ohio or something, the strategy and how you go about this is going to look vastly different. The next thing and sort of the last part before you kind of take action is to develop a strategy. So the next thing you want to do is create a plan. Um, so take a look at everything that you've compiled with the risk profile, how much you're using, what your budgets look like, etc., and make a plan. What do you want to do moving forward? Are you someone who has that risk appetite and you want to sign a contract where your energy is open to the market and you want to be able to take advantage of market dips? um, do you want to be someone who has budget certainty and you want to make sure you know what your budget's going to be moving forward? And then even if you are someone who wants to take advantage of market dips, how are you going to go about that? Do you want to, lock in a lot up front and have a little bit open? Do you want to have a lot open to the market? There's so many different ways to kind of broach and approach this subject, and there's not really a one size fits all for everyone. You really need to look at specifically what your company's doing, what your goals are, and create that plan so it's the best solution for you, which needs to be really, really well thought out. And then once you get to the point where you have that plan, you got to give it a go. You got to get out there, you got to start implementing it, whether it's with budgeting or with a new contract. Try it out and see how it works. And one of the most important things to keep in mind with this is, even if you create a strategy that you think is good, you got to ride it out for a little bit, because markets, as we've seen, they're volatile, they can change on a dime, but they really do revert to the fundamentals eventually. The short term can be really chaotic and painful, but if you ride it out, it should get back to where the fundamentals are telling you that it should be. So test out that strategy that you've made, see where it goes, give it a year or two, and then reformat, change it, make it better, based on the feedback that you're getting from everyone and what you're seeing that's going on, and get there. And it's something that's ever evolving. Something that worked for someone 3 years ago is not what's working today because of the change in volatility, and that might continue to happen. But you just got to make sure that you're prepared, you're looking at what's going on, you're looking at the energy markets, and you're doing what's best for your company.
Yeah, and Zach, I'd add to that. You have on the screen here, um, you know, a sample of triggers versus market. And I'm sure you had similar conversations last year where you had you maybe had some open orders that were at a sort of opportunistic market price point, and once that price was 30-40 dollars out of range, you sort of have to have that customer, you have to have that conversation with the customer to reevaluate whether that's realistic, and probably adjust that to the market, prevailing market conditions. Not being careful not to go too long in a high price environment. You want to stay short, but also be realistic about how to manage in the short term.
Yeah, exactly.
You agree with that? Yeah.
So, Alexi, I've kind of talked through some of the, the shorter term strategies that folks can take advantage of to kind of deal with this volatility. I know you had some thoughts on some longer term solutions, particularly related to renewable energy. So, what are some other approaches that folks can take to reduce their exposure in these crazy wild west markets?
Hmm. Um, yeah. So I think there are longer term solutions, and options. I think even before we get there and get into renewable energy, which is a longer term strategy. Demand side management is a big one, right? So, demand side management, basically, you should think about this as energy curtailment during peak events or scarcity events. Um, in, in, in a really high price environment, and particularly, a couple of, of, of days or even hours in the summer, and then in the winter, when you really do have that storm that comes through, and um, prices impacted. Remember, you might have a price that changes by a factor of 10, right? On a design day. And so if you can reduce your consumption, you're going to save money. And so you've got to understand your contract structure. Obviously, has got to be aligned with that so that you can actually capture the benefits of that. But generally there are informal programs, demand response programs, so you can do a lot of that stuff informally. You can target the cap tag, or the instantaneous demand for a particular summer. It actually has just a couple of hours, or even 1 hour has a significant impact on your future costs. If you can reduce that instantaneous demand, it's worth going after, and you can do that informally. You can do that by participating in a formal demand response program, either directly with the utility, or through the RTO, or even there are plenty of aggregators that can do this as well, and that you can negotiate terms with. But this is kind of your um, first line approach, quick impact option to reduce exposure. You can't get charged effectively for high prices when you're not consuming in those hours.
Great. So, in addition to that, we talked about renewable energy being a long-term solution. How can renewable energy actually help deal with this kind of volatility that we've been seeing?
Sure. Yeah, it is a longer term solution. It takes some time to develop these projects, whether they're on site or off site. But renewable energy PPA is basically a price hedge. In very simple terms, you're agreeing to a fixed price, and basically that's mitigating the market price, or decreasing the power that you're buying from the market. And the ultimately the impact of that is to decrease volatility, because you have a portion of your budget that is tied to a fixed price as opposed to a volatile market price. There's a number of ways to do this. Um, you can go behind the meter, so you're actually installing the project on site. Tends to be a little bit of um, um, you know, it's not always simple to to develop projects on site. It takes some project management and some construction capabilities, even if you are hiring contractors. But and there's a capex consideration there. An alternative that's becoming more and more frequent is a power purchase agreement, and that can either be done behind the meter on site or off site. So benefits of that are that the third party that you're entering into a contract for is developing the project. It's their capital, and you are agreeing to take the offtake at a fixed price for some period of time. And there are other types of agreements. There are net metering agreements, virtual net metering agreements, where and some of these are kind of tied to the regulatory environment that you're operating in. But ultimately, if your site is in a region that has this regulatory option, it's something to look into, because often these can be either no cost or actually almost guaranteed savings, and that's just a no-brainer. So it's there's a lot there, but these projects, what they all have in common is that they reduce volatility. They can actually lower your unit cost of power, and they offset your carbon emissions.
Yeah, that all sounds really good, Alexi. The thing is, it sounds great in theory, but how do customers actually practically approach this while being able to, take into consideration a lot of other factors, like you said, sometimes it's expensive capex, their carbon goals, the amount of time it's going to take for these to get online, and just making sure that they're able to keep track of all of it along with everything else. How do they practically do this?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I'd say first and foremost, think long. Think about um, the fact that these types of agreements are they can be 15 to 20 years, or longer. So you've got to consider all the different goals that your organization has, be it carbon management, be it cost or capex restrictions, the price of power, and um, external stakeholders. So again, I think the sort of going in the sequence of how you probably approach this, um, always wise to look at energy efficiency as a first action. Do that energy audit. There's often some measures within a facility that have a pretty quick payback. And the other reason you're doing this is you want to make your your site as efficient as possible before you start signing agreements that are potentially 15, 20 years. You want to know what your consumption is going to be. So do all those easy projects first. Then I'd say probably somewhat self-serving, but you probably want to hire a consultant who does this, right? And I say that because there can be a lot of complexity. These agreements really can run the gamut from um, outright ownership to power purchase agreements to renewable energy credits, carbon offsets. There's lots of different ways to tackle carbon, and you want to work with a professional that can identify and help you identify what your internal goals are, but what the products are out there that can solve that, and they can help you with any negotiations, particularly PPA negotiations, which can be complicated. You want to make sure that you're going after those net metering projects, and you want somebody that can look into the regulatory policies to see if that's available. And again, as I said, first think long term. These are all these goals that an organization has they can go out. You got to be looking 15, 20 years. This stuff isn't going to be um, isn't going to come together all at once. You need to be thinking about not just your organization's goals, but also the regulatory environment you operate in. You can see here things like Local Law 97 in New York, which is or Boston's BERDO, the disclosure ordinance. These are laws in large cities, and they're becoming increasingly common, that actually require buildings to reduce carbon emissions. So you want to make sure, if you're entering into a PPA or you're building a project, that that's going to accomplish, or count in the eyes of those regulations. All this stuff is important. It's not easy, but it's achievable, and it's worth it.
Yeah, great. Thank you. There's definitely a lot that's involved with this, but it's definitely something that's important for folks to keep in mind, especially like you said, as there start to be more ordinances in these cities where a lot of customers are, and there are, more goals that are coming out for carbon emissions and those sorts of things within organizations and whatnot. It's all important to keep in mind. And
Absolutely.
staying on that topic, uh, let's put out our last poll here. Um, so our poll here is: how has your organization interacted with renewable energy products of the type that we were discussing here? Not at all. You're evaluating some, but you haven't quite implemented anything. You have some on-site renewables or net metering that's already at some facilities. You have some off-site renewables that you're contracted with, or some combination of everything together. What are you seeing from a lot of your clients here, Alexi?
Wow. Well, a little bit or a lot of everything. You know, Again, we've both been doing this for a while. I've been at Veolia for 10 years, and I will say, when I 10 years ago, this is a pretty small part of my daily responsibility, and now it's at least half. So um, a lot of it does depend on where you are, what the regional policies are. There's a lot of activity in New England on this front. Trying to make sense of Birdo and how to comply with that. And there is, I've done a lot with net metering, and virtual net metering, which is basically an offsite project that can be, so an offsite project where you actually receive the benefits of the net metering credits to your retail account. That could be a guaranteed winner. We've targeted that for a lot of our customers as sort of just being a way to generate guaranteed cost savings, lower carbon, and and without the hassle of actually building a project.
Yeah, I would say I've seen very similar things where clients are kind of taking note of what's going on around them and planning with it, and it really does take a combination of things. There's not really one single solution that'll fix this problem for everyone. It's something that you kind of need to have a whole portfolio of items together that are really going to solve the problem for you and help you figure out your long-term solution.
Yeah, and a lot of customers are buying Rex, right? So it's
Hmm.
it's and that's probably more so than than some of the other options. Renewable energy credits are, um, that's a that's a growing industry. It basically gives you the rights to the renewable energy attributes, either on a mandatory basis, if your state or region requires it, or on a voluntary basis. So a lot of customers that I'm sure both of us work with are, will start by making voluntary purchases of renewable credits, and then they kind of go down the pathway of, okay, what can I do if I want to actually build a project, or have somebody else build a project and take the power from that and the
Hmm.
Rex from that. So I've seen that a few times, a number of times as well, it's always a pathway.
For sure. Well, folks, that's all we have for today. So I just wanted to thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to us. I hope this has been educational and you've been able to take something out of this. Thank you to Alexi for sitting here and chatting with me about this. I've had a great time chatting with you.
Same. Thank you, Zach.
Everyone,
Better. We'll have
have a
we'll have a better 2023. It's
yeah,
it's calm, smooth sailing, right?
hopefully, hopefully.
Cheap prices.
Yeah. Well, thanks again, everyone. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and talk to you later.